Okay, this is the special meeting of the Eureka Springs Parks and Recreation Commission, Tuesday, February 1st. As a special meeting, there is only one item on the agenda. Sue, would you call roll?
Yes. So, Edward Robinson?
Here.
Kevin Rule?
Here.
Ruth Hager?
Here.
Pat Cosner?
Here.
And Sue Hubbard is here. So we do have a quorum.
Okay. The only item on the agenda is the approval of the 2021 financials that we postponed from the last regular meeting where we were not going to have a quorum. Scott, if you would, please just give us a brief synopsis of the financials.
Very well. Thank you. I would first like to say that this will be the last time you see such lengthy and perhaps I don't want to say confusing, but the structure that we've had in the past tended on the confusing side. We've spent the year, among other things, tidying up our books. We had a lot of redundant accounts that were being used that when the bookkeeper was entering a transaction, there might be 3, 4, or 5 different accounts that were not inappropriate to use. And so sometimes things would be scattered and difficult to see. We're down to basically one page. Our budget, you might recall from seeing about a month ago when it was approved. The budget is down to basically one page. If anyone doesn't have a copy, I can certainly let you take a look at this. But this is, in essence, our chart of accounts, at least for Pnl type accounts. And so from now on, in fact, right now we are using the updated chart of accounts, and everything should be, in the future, like our Pnl statement, should be a one-pager, and possibly 2 pages, but it should be much, much easier. So please bear with me in this last one. We're using old redundant, not redundant, but old obsolete accounts, and that's why the Pnl statement especially is a little longer than it will be in the future. So everything had been corrected and set up to where we could implement the new system as of the first of the year, and that has been done. So that being said, our profit and loss statement is the main thing that we want to look at. And again, there's no surprises here. We came out better than we had budgeted, in large part because some of the bigger projects that we had wanted to do, we couldn't start this year. Basin Park's a good example. We were going to restore the stone under the fountain, and as we got into it, found that there were all sorts of engineering issues, and we are in the process right now of hiring an engineer to completely redesign, I shouldn't say redesign the park, but assess the park and design whatever changes need to be made to bring it current and to make repairs, et cetera. So that's sort of where we are at this point. And so if Pnl statement sort of speaks for itself, total income was $892,678.50. Our expenses were less than budgeted, but we still have a lot of projects to implement this year. We did have one question. Do you want to wait and ask your question later, or should I address it now?
Why don't we do that after we get the motions, then we'll have discussion.
If you want to address it, Scott, that's fine.
Oh, okay. I'll wait. Kevin had indicated we'll wait till there's a motion one way or another, and discussion. During discussion, I'll address that if there's a question about it. So in reality, we're just in a situation. The final segment of cleaning up the accounts over this past year was a few weeks ago. I went back for 16 months and reconciled all the bank accounts, looking literally at every transaction and making a lot of changes. There were just some errors in bookkeeping that were located and changed. So I'm confident in the accuracy of the books. It'll be the information this next year will be much easier to digest because whereas now income might be spread out over 2 or 3 accounts, they're all going to be consolidated in ones that are meaningful and easy to grasp. So it's just something that we have spent a lot of time over the last year getting this done, and I'm pleased that this is the last time we'll see this format on a P&L.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the financials?
I move to approve the proposed 2021 financials as attached hereto.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay. Discussion? Yes.
I've gone through the general ledger and through this and have found a $27,000 error in the 8th percent tax. There are 2 entries totaling that, which I have no idea where they came from, but they are not relevant to the 1/8% tax. This is more obvious if you look at this sheet. The 1/4% tax is always exactly half the size
Yes.
Yes.
of the 1/8, and that's not the case as shown on this. But I'll be happy to share. In fact,
So do you want to explain why that is, Scott?
Yes. And let me first state, since we have 3, well, we're going to have 4, I think, in another month, new commissioners, that if there's ever questions like that, feel free to call me in advance with questions so I can look into it. But I believe I have the answer to your question. That was something that was troubling to Kevin for quite some time, and we couldn't figure it out. It was one of the main reasons I went back and made an inquiry, basically transaction by transaction. We came to the point of May of 2021 where there were a group of deposits made by City Hall for the quarter and the 8-cent sales tax. They didn't make sense. In fact, they went back to December of the previous year. We did finally figure out that for December of, I guess it would be 2020, there was only 1 deposit made, not 2. It was a little difficult to sift through because they went a couple of months without making those payments, and then a lump sum in May of last year, of 2021. And so we got on the phone, or maybe it was an email with Lonnie. He looked into it, and we did get confirmation 2 weeks ago, perhaps, that they apparently forgot to make a transaction or make a transfer.
the city did?
Yes. They acknowledged that. They made I got an email yesterday that they have made that deposit. I need to also point out that in the future, that next year, this current year, it'll be much easier to track those sorts of things because they've agreed to make a direct deposit for the 8-cent tax into our 8-cent bank account, and the 1/4% will be deposited automatically into that account. And so there won't be a situation where we have to go and try to figure out what deposit was made or wasn't made. Go ahead, you have a question.
But it seems that could have been clear in the ledger if that had been noted in the ledger, because the problematic deposits were actually in April.
In May, yeah.
No, it was logged dated in the general ledger as in April.
Okay, maybe I'm mistaken then. It was April or May, or,
Yeah.
early spring.
And if those monies were actually for the previous year, which, if I understand you correctly, is the case, it seems that it should have been noted as such.
There, in a note in the entry for the transaction.
For those two problematic transactions.
Well, we discovered those problematic transactions about a week and a half ago as we were reviewing financials and trying to figure out where the discrepancy was. It doesn't affect this because we're cash accounting, and what wasn't deposited last year that should have been and is deposited this year will show up on the 2022 financials.
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for that.
Sure. And also then to clear up those issues, we decided last year, springtime sometime, perhaps May, we were going to set up a separate account for the 8-cent sales tax, which we did, but it took several months for various reasons. The bank wanted minutes, which take 60 days from the time you do it to actually get the minutes, and et cetera. So it took several months to get that account set up. And so the deposits continued to be made into one account and not being segregated. It was about the middle of the year when we finally had that account set up and ready to start using it. So at that time, I became aware that the accounts had not been reconciled. Rusty Wendell had been doing it in the past, and he was no longer working for us. And so when I became aware of that, first we tried to we were going to hire Scott Barton to do it, and he was unavailable. We hired another accountant that committed to do it and was supposed to have it done by the first of the year. Didn't happen. Turned out there was some surgery or some medical issues, but they didn't notify us. So here we are. I'm trying to get financial statements done and find out none of that's done. So it was, as Kevin said, about 2 weeks ago perhaps, that I went through 16 months worth of transactions.
My sympathies.
Started to find what these issues were. For what it's worth, none of they weren't, any of the errors I found, there were things like something should have been allocated to a different account. There were also some like duplicate deposits or transactions that when reconciled, see if this is done, and I will personally reconcile the accounts from now on. In fact, talking with our auditors, they like that idea, but then they also want the chairperson then to sign off on them when I'm done. So the not relying on outsiders to reconcile our accounts anymore, we'll make sure it's done on a monthly basis, and we'll be able to find those things right away when they're fresh.
So kind of a short version of where we've been is that in the past, after Dove left, there was really no one properly trained to do the books. The city was depositing both the 1/8 and the 1/4% tax into the general checking account, not even into the money market account. It took us, as Scott said, about 5 months with the bank because of the bank processes to get money market accounts and checking accounts set up for the 1/8 and the 1/4% sales tax so they can be segregated. We are only just now getting to the point where the city has agreed to deposit directly into the 1/8% money market account and the 1/4% money market account. We've also been trying for quite some time to hire a bookkeeper, a trained, qualified bookkeeper, which is proving to be next to impossible in this town. So Scott is now rewriting that job description, and I've suggested that he post it in papers in the corridor and in Berryville. And we're just going to have to figure out what it's going to take to get a qualified bookkeeper.
Well, may I ask this? Is it your intent to have a bookkeeper whose task it will be, you just give them the box of receipts and what have you, and they enter them in the ledger? Are you going to do that? Because I found in looking through the ledger I found quite a few problems, Scott, I really did. And I'll be happy to go over some of them with you. But there are, I found like 1/8% tax thing was logged into a whole other
And we
set.
found that as well,
Well,
and we corrected it.
well, it's not corrected in the version I have. So, the entries in the ledger that you gave me, some, that some of the entries are really poorly are described. I mean, there's no routine to it.
Right.
It should be very repetitious, and it's not.
But you're preaching to the choir.
That is
We understand that.
quite
We've
true.
known the problem.
Yes.
That's why we've been trying to hire a qualified bookkeeper and haven't been successful doing that. So if you
Well,
can figure out how to go about doing that in a way that we haven't been able to, we'd be happy to have the help.
Well, I'm just happy to hear that the plan is to hire a bookkeeper who will work for parks.
It's been that's been our intent for 8 months. I mean, that was when we first started looking for one.
Yeah.
I don't think I had heard a discussion in the times that I had been here at the meetings, but I'm happy, very happy to hear it.
Yeah.
Now, on another issue, if we can put that to rest then, I'm pleased by that. In looking at the shuttle expenses,
Yes.
did you not have drivers for the shuttle?
It's in
Yes, we
human
do.
resources.
Yes.
It should, if you're going to do a profit loss, it needs.
We aren't doing a profit loss for the shuttles. We were segregating those expenses, but all of the human resources is a single lump. We don't separate it out at all by individual,
Then this gives a false impression.
but it's not intended to be a P&L for the shuttles.
Well, let me address it like this. Everyone should understand how our HR, how we pay our employees. It's done through the city. We submit our timesheets. It's done both by paper and electronic. Excuse me. And then the city gives us a bill, a lump sum bill, excuse me, that's not itemized, but a one lump sum bill, and we pay that lump sum. They don't break it down, nor, although I've never asked, I think they would definitely balk at breaking it down by payroll for who's in the bait shop versus who's in admin or what have you. It's one of the problems that we have with having the city do our payroll for us. Now, we do that because that's how we also get the benefits that the city gets, et cetera. So I don't see a change in that. But what we do is we have a spreadsheet when we enter the time that we enter for each of the employees. We do have that. We keep it in a spreadsheet. And we can also have a report run by the HR department that will tell us for a single employee or a group of employees, and we can find that information out. It's just not in our accounting system. Kevin, he's always on top of these things, believe me. I get a lot of questions. He himself asked about that. He wanted to know, he knew that that was an element that isn't reported in our system, nor can it be. It's just we don't do the payroll, so we don't have that level of detail in our data. But we got the report. In fact, a week or two ago, you had asked for it.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't remember the exact number, but it was just over $16,000 for all the payroll. So our profit and loss statement is accurate, but the shuttle, the payroll for the shuttle is found under payroll because that's how we pay it. And I can't really report it differently because that's what we do. We write a check for the full amount of payroll for the month for everyone, from myself down to the newest shuttle driver that we might have hired a week earlier. And that's what we get, is a check that pays the city back for the full sum, benefits, wages, et cetera.
Well, it makes me uncomfortable. I mean, as you know, the shuttle income and loss has been at issue here for several
Yes.
years.
Mhm.
And it makes me uncomfortable to hear it said that the shuttles are, they're having nearly $70,000 income without any countervail, giving the actual reality of it. You also don't have, besides the shuttle drivers, you also on shuttle expenses don't even include the payments on the loans. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, the payments on the loans, the principal of the payment is considered an asset, and it goes on the balance sheet. The only thing that comes in is the interest on the loans, and remind me where that is, Scott.
Yeah, I'm looking for that now.
It's on the last page.
Yeah, there it is.
Right, interest paid. So everything is in there that are shuttle expenses, with the exception of broken out human resources.
What about the $12,000 in loan payments? That's not in there.
That's considered an asset. It goes onto the balance sheet as an asset.
Yeah, the interest portion of those payments is an expense. The principal portion goes to paid, it's equity.
An asset.
Yeah, it's an asset, so.
Okay.
So it's there. Now, perhaps maybe it would be helpful in the future, we could do a statement of cash flows that would show that sort of transaction. In other words, the P&L statement would only show the expense portion, so the interest paid. A P&L statement is not going to show the equity portion of that loan or the principal payment. But we could do a statement of cash flows that shows all the money that went out and what account it went into, regardless of whether it's income or an expense. So that might help to answer a question like what you just asked.
I think that would be a
I mean,
good.
this was one of the first questions I asked a year and a half ago, and we went through this, and that was explained to me by Rusty when he was acting as a consultant on the accounting. It is an asset, and it's the way the city accounts for assets, and that's what the equity value is on the balance sheet. And it's just like when the remodel to cabin 1 was added to the equity value of cabin 1. So,
And I wonder too, they're just, again, comparing apples and oranges, but the way I do things at Sparky's, a payroll report that I do for myself
Yeah.
is not on my P&L broken down, who's cashier, who's this, who's that. But I do a separate payroll account that shows how much money I spend on cashier, cook, dishwasher, from my own personal knowledge, but it doesn't belong on my P&L. I don't know, it's kind of the
Right.
same thing, I guess.
And that is the point. That's also why I say if questions are given to me while I'm in the office, we can run these reports, because statement of cash flow report I can do in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
The info for the payroll, like if you wanted to know how much did we pay our shuttle drivers, again, it was asked just, I think a week ago, I provided you with that.
I don't remember exactly what the number was. but
Recently,
we were
within the
still-
last week or two. He asked for
We
the
were
same.
still net revenue, almost 40,000.
Yeah, he asked, and I do recall it was $16,000 plus, and I could forward that to all of you tomorrow if you'd like. It was just a matter of me finding the email. But that, in other words, that information is stuff that doesn't come out of our accounting program itself. We have to, when we do payroll, there's actually 2 ways we capture that information. Number one is all of that information is in the city's payroll system, and I tried to run a report today. We don't have the ability to run that report, but Jerry is as helpful as can be. He's great. And when we asked him for that report, when Kevin asked how much we paid shuttle drivers. We had it within an hour or two. So any of that sort of information I can usually get if there's something you think you need. We don't generally provide that sort of detail in these reports, but it's available. It's just that particular one. Most of the things that you might request, I can run a report right out of QuickBooks. Payroll is entirely different. That's something that I have to get from the HR department. I said there is another way that we do it, and Nikki does keep a spreadsheet of the different hours of each employee, and by tracking that and knowing how much we pay them, I could do it in the office, but much better to do it from City Hall, because then we're getting the actual data that is went into those paychecks.
Right.
So it's information that we could get, like the shuttle driver income. Yes, you are right that if we wanted to just look at the income for shuttles, it doesn't tell us right here looking at this document how much we paid our shuttle drivers.
Well, it means you don't know what your net is.
But we do.
Right.
And that's what, we tracked it when we initially kicked off the program, but it's not something that needs to be on the P&L, because it would require that we do a completely separate P&L just for the shuttles.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'd have to keep track of gardening hours and all the other, why would you do just one on the P&L? That makes sense to me. One type of,
I mean, the way that we've been doing it, and the reason why it was decided that we needed to create the P&L to tell the whole story and not a piece of the story. We weren't going to do a completely separate P&L because that gives a slightly distorted picture. And the Finance Committee was reviewing everything that went into the financials so that we could come back to the rest of the commission and say, yes, we've looked at that. We understand what it is. And like Scott said, I asked him about it 2 weeks ago. He pulled the information. We looked at it. We are still net almost 40,000 revenue.
What?
When you look,
Say
we are
again?
net almost 40,000 revenue when you take all of the income that has come from shuttle operations and all of the expenses from shuttle operations. But there wasn't a need to put it into the P&L because that's not what we've been tracking. So that's why he said, if you have a question like that, you can certainly ask him beforehand. It's a whole lot easier for him to be able to provide the information. But this is the format that we have
Well,
settled on for the P&L.
Yeah, well, I wasn't on the commission beforehand,
I understand.
so this is what the issue is tonight, and I felt it essential that I address my concerns about it, because we are working with public money here.
That's right. And that's why we focused so much on operationalizing the shuttles so that it generated revenue. It did not generate. In 2021 or 2020, we lost $20,000 on the shuttle operation
I'm aware
because
of-
they weren't operational.
I'm aware that the shuttles were losing money from the
And Scott
get-go.
focused very hard on making the operation work, and it does now.
What changes were made?
Well, to begin with, in the past, there was no control over private shuttles. They didn't pay anything. They could pick up riders in the park. They could solicit riders in the park. We never ran more than one shuttle, ever, and generally it was only on Saturday and Sunday, and the private operators were able to come in, swoop through the parking lot, pick up anybody that walked in, charge them, and go ride. So now the private operators are licensed. They pay us in advance $5 per rider. So that is all net. And they are not permitted to solicit any riders in the park. They can only serve riders that have reserved with them beforehand, outside the park. So they're not cannibalizing our business. We're running our business efficiently. We're running it on days that make sense, more than just Saturdays and Sundays. During the summer, we'll run them midweek if there's demand for it. We have a reservation program
I know.
that Scott put together so we know in advance when we need to run the shuttles. It was really pretty simple to operationalize. There'd just been no effort put into it previously.
How do you deal with people who self-shuttle?
You don't. Well, we've been trying to shut that down, and what I discovered this weekend, there was supposed to have been a sign put at the turnaround that said authorized vehicles only. What was put up there was shuttles only, no parking. And so there were some people that were interpreting that as long as I don't park up here, I can self-shuttle. Scott and I have had several discussions about that this week, and it will be very clear that they are not going to be allowed into either shuttle turnaround.
There's, to answer your question just in a little more depth, on the first page of the profit and loss statement, a little past halfway down, shuttle income hyphen bookings, roughly $66,000. That's bookings through our booking software. Or people could technically go down to the bait shop and book it there, but it's all done online now. People can book online before they even hop in the car and head out here. So that was $66,239.77. Where you see the wristband sales, that actually is the wristbands that we send to the vendor. We had 2 vendors. We're down to 1 now. So when they buy wristbands, they pay us $5 per wristband in advance. And then the vendor permit fee, that's just the annual fee they pay to apply to be a vendor. So those are the main areas of income. In fact, I'd say the sole areas of income from the shuttle operations. So you can see the income. The expenses on that last page, again, the only expenses that aren't listed under shuttles is the $16,000 in payroll for the drivers, but that money wasn't left out. It's under that lump sum payment to the city for payroll. So have I answered your question, or do you have any others? Or?
Well, I think my concerns would be resolved if I had a copy of the general ledger as it has been corrected. Because, again, in the copy that I have, I see other issues that I didn't make a list of. I mean,
I'm not sure what other issues they would be, so we probably would have to look at. But the general ledger I sent you was current. Might have been some confusion between you and
As of the beginning of
Chairman.
last week.
Right, as of a week ago. But when I printed that for you, we had already gone through and made those changes. So it's hard for me to comment on if there's an issue on a transaction or several transactions without seeing what they are. So it's hard for me to comment on something
right.
that
Well, I'm not asking for a comment. I'm just saying if this is because I don't want to spend my time either, or waste yours, in going back through the ledger. It's not my favorite thing to do. But if this is a current ledger, then I will go back through another time, and I will identify those issues that seem to me to be questionable.
Okay.
There's things, for example, being misplaced, miscategorized. I will say, too, this is the first ledger I have seen at the end of the year that did not have the reconciliation at the bottom.
Okay, you had asked for the general ledger report for the year, and I printed that report. So.
Well, but the general ledgers, I have the general ledgers back through 2011, and every one of them has a summary reconciliation of the various issue areas at the bottom, at the end of the ledger.
Okay.
It's included in it, which is a handy thing to have.
Okay. Maybe I could take a look at that. I assume Rusty was doing those?
No, I don't think so. I think Donna Woods was, and then Doug was.
Well, Donna hasn't been here for
Some
8 years, 9 years.
She was only here for a year, anyway, a year or two. Most of those might have been Dove, because she was here a lot longer.
Donna was the parks bookkeeper for some years before she
it?
became the interim
I
director.
forgot it was that long.
So
Well,
that-
and she
Can
did it when she was interim director as well, but.
Yes,
But she was done with that by 2015, right?
And I feel like are we still really in discussion without voting? Are we still discussing this?
Yeah.
I feel like we're kind of, it's important things that Pat's bringing up, but it feels like we're
Yeah.
getting off track from discussion of the actual motion and whether we should be voting or not.
Only to the extent that if there's a question that somebody has to decide whether or not they're going to vote to approve or disapprove
That's true.
a financial statement, then those are the types of questions Pat's asking. I would have to see the transactions that are questionable, but I can also anticipate what some of them might be. For instance, when I went through, I'm talking hours and hours going through trying to reconcile the accounts. No, I did not go through and look at every one of them and see, are there good descriptions? That's something that is sorely missing from our bookkeeping. What's this especially if it's a journal entry, for instance, why is this being done? So, like if I went through and the bank account wasn't reconciling with our financial statements, it was looking to see what's missing and finding either a dollar and cent that was the exact number we're looking for, or more often than not, there were things that had been entered a couple of times. Why that happened, I don't know. It's one of the reasons we're looking for a bookkeeper with more experience. And I want to say that I hate to even say this in an open meeting, because the person who's currently doing it for us is a tremendous employee.
Mm-hmm.
Just bookkeeping is not his area of training and expertise, and so he is doing the best job he can. So please understand, I'm in no way saying anything negative against a good employee.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need somebody that has the ability to make those judgment calls. That, and again, it's also simple. The fact that we have the simpler chart of accounts makes it so much easier, because I could pick at just about anything here. Major repairs and maintenance. That we formerly probably had 20 different accounts that he could select from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of not fair to him either. But so you would have maybe this month, if we bought a hammer, it would go under tools. Maybe next month somebody bought a hammer, it might go under equipment. We've streamlined it so those choices are not, those missed choices or poor choices are not going to be made again. So to reconcile, it was making sure that the numbers are accurate. And we knew if something was income, but yeah, there were times where I saw a transaction that I wondered, well, should it have been professional services, or should it have been, trail maintenance, or so I can't 18 months later go and try to decipher which it should have been, but it was going into an expense account that was related to, for instance, Lake Leatherwood. If it was related to trail maintenance, I know it's Lake Leatherwood, and I know it's an expense. Now, should it have been a different expense category or something along those lines? Yeah, possibly. Those sorts of things. Whether that hammer is under tools or under equipment, those start to be, I don't say they're unimportant, but the financial statements are accurate, because the point is we bought two tools, and okay, one's under equipment and one's under tools, but the financial statements, as far as the money that was spent and what it was spent on, that was accurate.
Well, the one that really caught my eye was the misplacement of one of the 1/8% tax payments. That was I'd have to go back and look and see where it is, but it was in a totally inappropriate place. And anyway, I don't.
And you're talking about for 2021?
No, for 2020. Oh, yes, for 2021, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, for 2020?
No,
Yeah.
it's for 2021.
2021.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I do seem to recall one transaction related to the 8-cent tax, probably could have been the quarter, but I believe it was the 8 cent, where when that first, it would have been right after that account was opened up for that 1/8 cent tax money to go into, and it was put in QuickBooks under the wrong bank account. It was deposited into the proper bank account, but it was put in QuickBooks under the wrong bank account. I don't know if that's the transaction you're talking about, but I did correct that when I did the reconciliation. And the point is the books were okay as far as it was just that it showed that it was in the wrong account. That's why I went through and did that reconciliation, because, how can you not have your financial, your digital financial records match up exactly with what your bank accounts were? And keep in mind, we went through 3 different accountants this year to try to
Listen,
try to do that.
My heart goes out to
Yeah.
you, it does.
And so the point is, the dollars and cents were right. It just, and an expense was an expense, income was income. So nothing was skewed inappropriately. But the one transaction that I'm thinking of, it might be the one you're talking about as well. It was put in the account in QuickBooks in the wrong, but see, to avoid that from happening in the future, one of the things that I've looked at when we went through and created the chart of accounts is our bank accounts now have under the accounts for each of the bank accounts, I have the last 4 of the account, last 4 digits of the account number. So now if somebody's looking at a bank statement, they know that they're depositing it in the right bank account. So as we find these things where somebody used a wrong account that they shouldn't have, the best thing to do is simplify it to where it's hard to make a mistake. Hard to pick the wrong bank account when you have the last 4 digits of the account number on there. So if you look at if I was to run
Yeah, it's on
if
the
I
balance.
may lean over and show you, like here, where it says 1/8 checking, and there's a 1579 after that. That's the last 4 digits of that account. So see, as we run into these problems, the sources of errors that might have been made, I'm trying to kind of dummy-proof it by making the accounts as descriptive as possible, not easy to confuse with other accounts, and things like this where you're adding an account, I mean, not the whole account number, we don't want people to have that, but the last 4, so we know when it's deposited. Very easy to just look at the deposit slip and make sure that you've got the right bank account.
Well, I understand and appreciate all the effort that has been put into trying to make a silk purse out of the sow's ear you were handed.
Yeah.
So, I'm fully respectful of that.
Thank you.
But in my view, as a commissioner, I need to understand what it is that I'm voting for and against when it comes, especially when it comes to the finances. I think that things would be, your life and the books would be simplified if you were, for example, to try to get one tax rather than 2, to go through the process that's a whole other issue. But rather than having the 1/8% tax, I
Right.
know complicates matters greatly. It would be to the park's benefit if those two taxes were revisited and combined.
And that would be great.
I-
If the city council
absolutely.
was willing to do that, but it would, as I understand it, that would require a resolution to go on the ballot.
It would.
It
It would
would.
need to be voted on, so that's not going to happen anytime soon. What we have done in the meantime is we've set up separate bank accounts so that we can track restricted and unrestricted funds. And even if we do get rid of the two separate taxes and how they can be spent, we still have restricted grant money. So we're always going to have to track restricted money. It really isn't going to simplify that much. What will simplify it is when the city starts making two deposits
Yes.
instead of a single one and making those deposits into the correct accounts. That takes all of the handwork out of separating it out because we just get it as a lump sum number. So by them putting it directly into the accounts, it makes it far easier to track the revenues that come in that are restricted and the revenues that are unrestricted.
Right.
And then we have set up accounts so that we can account for the capital and the maintenance spend that is what the 8% sales tax is supposed to be for.
Well, several years ago, when Lonnie gave me the breakdown that he sent to Parks, so he used to send a breakdown of between the quarter and the eighth. If he's not doing it anymore, you could well ask him to please.
Well, but that doesn't solve the problem of them not making the deposits when they come in.
No, it doesn't.
So that is being addressed by the separate bank accounts and them making two separate deposits rather than a single deposit. And the deposits going into money market accounts rather than into the general checking account. So that's one of the things that Scott is next on the list, is to go back, now that we have the accounts set up. He's going to go back over the last 2 years, get the amount of 8% tax that we have received. He is then going to look at the spends that have been items that qualify under that 8%, capital spend at Lake Leatherwood and maintenance, and pull that out of that total amount so that we can put the correct amounts into each of the two accounts going forward.
And at that point, again, the goal has been to make things idiot-proof as possible, and I don't mean any, it's better to...
It's a good term.
It's better to be hard to make a mistake than easy. So with all these little things that we've done are calculated to keep the human element out of it by having deposits made directly into the appropriate accounts. You don't have a situation where somebody inadvertently deposits it in a wrong account. There's no commingling whatsoever at that point because 8-cent money goes in the 8-cent account, quarter-cent money goes in the quarter account, and then the only time we'll ever write money out of the 8-cent account is if it's for something that's major maintenance or capital improvements at Lake Leatherwood Park. So it'll be rare that we write a check, but when we do, it'll be only for something that is specifically authorized to be paid out of that account. So, and that's why I started out by saying the way things are this past year, we were stuck with the accounts that we had. We started chipping away about a year ago. You might recall we made some changes then, but there were still a lot of accounts that, because we were in the middle of a year, you can't undo what you've already done, and you've used all of these accounts, and they're reflected on your financial statement. Your budget was based on those accounts and those expenditures from previous years. And so we purposed, and we've met many times, Kevin and then Scott Barden when he was on the Finance Committee, hashing out how are we going to set up these accounts, and we did it multiple times. There are times we'd go one direction, and then we'd look at it and say, no, let's change it a little more. But we purposed to settle on the chart of accounts that we were going to stay with, and by the first of the year, we would start using those accounts and those accounts only, and that's what we're doing right now. Something that might also be helpful is maybe at least for the first couple of months in this year, I could provide the Commission, just as part of the Director's report, maybe each month. I can provide a monthly,
Be nice.
yeah, I'll provide a monthly statement. Because see, that's another thing, by the way, we're trying to, again, make this idiot-proof. The current system that we have with either the budget or the P&L, to get in the form that we have, I have to run a report from QuickBooks and then put it into a spreadsheet and then format it the way it needs to be, combine certain accounts. You know, it's very, you know, anytime you have the human element in there where you're making changes and you're combining things, you've got potential at least for error. The way we have it now, our chart of accounts is simple and easy, and I can run a budget out of QuickBooks now, and then it's so easy to, you just compare your budget to your P&L, and it's all done digitally. There's no human element there transferring things into a spreadsheet and making changes.
But the big human element problem is still with the entering the income and
Pat,
expenses.
could you speak into the microphone, because it's not going to get picked up.
The problem in looking at the ledger
Yes,
is there is a problem at that level.
yes.
And how can that be curtailed or remedied? The problem lies in the lack of uniformity, the questionable accuracy, so on and so forth. So, and if you, for example, were to do a monthly report to the commissioners, then you would notice, and we would notice, it would come to our attention too, some of the things that I noticed in looking through small issues in the general ledger. Looking, for example, at the water bills for the springs.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere or other in the year last year, all of a sudden Harding Springs
Yes.
started running lots of water through Harding Spring.
Yes.
Now, if that had been noticed, it wouldn't have gone on as long as it did, because it was clearly had to have been a water leak, wasn't it?
We still don't know what caused that. And it wasn't just Harding. There was at least one other spring where our, Pat's right, our water bills at Harding for sure, and one other went way up. And of course, it's going to go up in the summer, but it went up
It was
way more than any of the other gardens, and we water them all about the same. We still don't know what's causing that. Is there a leak somewhere? I feel that there's, and it's just an educated guess, that at some time in the past, when somebody built a house nearby and tapped into a water line, maybe it was that water. I'm just guessing. I mean, how else does your water
Shouldn't be, the meter ought to be under the hatch, that hatch in Harding
Yeah,
Springs.
it ought
So
to be, but-
these are all process things that we can get to.
Yeah.
We need to really focus on what we're doing here right now. So if there are other, I mean, we can't address your questions about the ledger because nobody else at this table has looked at the general ledger. What Scott and I have done is run financial statements and reviewed them, which is what we did as the Finance Committee when Scott Barden was here previously. That's where we were catching things. I think he's done a very good job of catching it. I don't believe that there are any significant errors in what's here from everything that I've looked at. But at a point between what the Finance Committee looks at and what Scott represents, he's going to be telling us these are accurate financials. The only way to get around that is to hire an auditor and go back and audit the books. And we've known that the books are a mess. The books have been a mess. It's one of the reasons why I'm sitting on the commission. But there are only so many things you can do when you're starting with a chart of accounts that was just a hash of unintelligible categories. I mean, that when we started out this time last year, actually it was probably third quarter last year, they were tracking fuel by vehicle. But there's no way to do that accurately. And everyone knew that it was inaccurate, but that was the way it was done. So there are certain things we've streamlined, we've cut things back, we've made it simpler. We recognize where the shortfall is, and until we get a bookkeeper in, he's going to be stuck with going back every quarter and fixing things, and that's what we're trying to solve. But he has spent, I know of the last 3 weeks, working almost exclusively to make sure that everything is represented correctly on these statements.
I would go a step further than that and say that our goal was that when I met with the Finance Committee a year ago, and we said, okay, we've got a year to kind of evolve this cumbersome, ugly process into something simpler, and now it's difficult to make mistakes, or any significant mistakes at least. But there's a couple of different rules that we've implemented. One of them is, first of all, I didn't become aware that the bookkeeper wasn't reconciling the accounts monthly. I mean, to me, it was inconceivable. But that's been corrected at this point. And now, as we go month to month, there's first of all, I'm reconciling the accounts. I talked with the state auditor about the situation, and he said he would prefer to also then see one other person. A commissioner would be ideal. Somebody on the Finance Committee would probably make the most sense. That could be you. There's going to be committee assignments here where you review the reconciliation statement, and the other document that they want reviewed once a month and signed off on is there's an auditor's report as well. So we can print the auditor's report as well as the reconciliation statement. And yeah, it should be looked at once a month and signed off on. And that will help us to where we won't have these questions a month into a new year, for something that happened a year ago. Yeah. We will know that month. If you're going to look at that reconciliation statement and the auditor's report, it'll be really easy then, rather than going through what you apparently just did, where you look through a general ledger. In a year, by the way, where we made so many changes, I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been to try to track all of that. But see, now it's all simple. All of those changes are made. Now it's just a matter of looking at the transactions that are made on a monthly basis, and are they accurate? And I'm with you on, you made a comment about lack of documentation of what a transaction was for. I'm a big believer in notes. Why did you do this transaction? That's nearly missing in our bookkeeping in the past. And those are the things, so if you see a transaction that you think is not questionable necessarily, but let's say it's just not easy to ascertain, well, what was that for? Mm-hmm. Well, if it was just done a week or two ago, it's easy to remember what it was for and add it. A year later, a year and a half later, when it's someone who wasn't even involved in the process, it becomes very difficult. So all of these procedures that we have in place now are designed to nip things in the bud early. When I went through and I did all those reconciliations, I know that the numbers are right. In other words, if we had a deposit made into a bank account, it's reflected in our books. It's an accurate number. It matches what was in there. But at this stage of the game, it's impossible for me to remember, oh yeah, that was for, a switch that we had to replace on one of the shuttles. Those are things that can be done when they're fresh in someone's mind. But so my point is the numbers are correct, but yeah, to try to decide was that particular expenditure on Was that particular expenditure on a switch for the shuttle, or was it for new brakes, or whatever? It's those sorts of things that just are the details. And yes, the devils are in the details, but we still have that information as well, because if they're, for instance, if you come to me and you say, there's a transaction on last year's general ledger, here it is, it's check number such and such, I can go right to our purchase orders and, in a few minutes, find the purchase order and the receipt for what was purchased. But sitting here tonight, of course, I can't do that. But all I'm saying is that we now have the procedures in place to where systematically, month by month, these things are being entered accurately with more detail. And I would be delighted to have you be the person to look at that, sign off on the monthly auditor's report. And, you don't have to be an auditor for that. It's just a report that is designed to be given to auditors to be able to track the information. So there would be those two documents that you could look at on a monthly basis. In fact, I'll just make it part of the director's report from now on. I'll bring it once a month. I will bring the reconciliation report from the previous month and the auditor's report, at least for the first month or two. You can then decide if you want both of those or what. And I can do a year-to-date Pnl statement as well.
So again, these are things that are processed that we can address in a different forum. This is about satisfying you that he has done his due diligence, and that what's left of the Finance Committee has done their due diligence, and that we're representing this as an accurate report. So if there's another question that you have so that we can move this along, because we still have a whole nother agenda for the workshop to get to tonight. Is there something else that we can address for you and answer with regard to this?
Not now.
Okay.
So I have a couple of questions just to understand the process. So after if we approve these tonight, are these accounts audited for the year?
Yes.
So that will happen, and if there was an error, that would come to light?
Yes.
And the other question is, so the profit and loss shows the checking accounts and the money market accounts.
Yes.
Do we have other monies that are rainy day reserves, or is that the total amount of money that the parks has?
No. So again, let's go back to what existed previously was a general checking account and a money market account that was listed as reserve, which makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't align with anything, whether it's the tax payments or how we spend it. It is unfortunately still named reserve because that's what it's named in the bank, and we have to go through a whole process that includes having it on an agenda that shows up on the meeting minutes and a letter that is voted on in the committee to get the bank to change anything, and we're going to have to go through that process.
Yeah, no, I remember that procedure when you were opening up the extra accounts.
Right.
Yes.
So we're still kind of marching in that direction, but what is still named the reserve account for the money market is the 0.25%. What is named general checking account is the 0.25% checking account. The other two accounts, the other money market account and the other checking account, are intended specifically for the 8%, which is a restricted revenue, and there are only certain things that we can spend it on. So that's why I was saying Scott still has to go back for the past 2 years, get all of the tax statements to know what we have received in 8%, what we have received in 0.25%, and then go back on the major spends, capital spends, equipment, that sort of thing, that falls under the 8%. Take that out of it so we can reconcile it. And the money that's rather than having $300,000 sitting in a checking account, it should be sitting in the appropriate money market account, so it's at least earning something.
Yeah, I understand.
And then transferred into the checking account monthly as we need to pay bills.
Okay.
And also, you can see on the balance sheet, under current assets, the bank accounts, this shows our 4 bank accounts. Here's the 1/8% checking account. Again, there's the last 4 of that account number. So you could come in at any time, you could pull that file that shows, the bank statements for that, and you can look at the bank statements for it. But that is the current amount, or at least as of December 31st. And that's my point. That's what I'm saying, is that these numbers are all accurate.
Right, yeah.
And so these financial statements are accurate. We currently have as of December 31st, we had $488,165,000. You can call that reserves if you like. In this money market for reserves, there is an account that, and maybe I need to drop that wording.
You do need to drop it. We've talked about that.
But the point is, this is just a money market account where I think the reason Justin Huss, I believe, set that one up, and I believe it was just because he started wanting money market interest on that money that he was going to start putting in what he termed reserves. So again, the reason we have so much money right now is all of this money in essence is reserve. It's set aside for some of these big projects that we have coming up that we need to fund.
Yeah, my question, so, and that's what I've heard you say, similar to that, that money is available to be spent. My question is it really available, if we have another shutdown or big disaster?
Oh, absolutely.
Are there extra funds other than that, or if we spent that, are we out of money?
No, if we spent that, we're out of money.
Okay, that was my question. So we really shouldn't spend all of that.
I understand that the last year before last, when Parks was closed for a year, once it opened back up, our revenue was higher than it had ever been before. So,
Right, yeah.
It's not, I'm not saying that the good times will roll on forever,
Right.
but people's behaviors have changed through COVID, and we've seen it this year too. Lodging is up.
Yeah, but something, we don't know what the next disaster may be.
You never know what it is.
Exactly, and how that will affect us.
But the reality is that, we are not going to take a lot of tax money and put it into an account and not spend it when we have so many capital projects that are facing us and that have been deferred for decades. So the dam is something that has been deferred for ages. I remember talking to Bruce Levine about that 12 years ago. Basin Park is going to be a big project. We've got Magnetic that's under construction. We've got Harding that's going to have to be addressed. There are significant capital projects facing us. And so the money, we haven't been in a hurry to spend it because we know that we're going to need money for those projects once the scope is defined. But the goal is not to hold a big chunk of money in reserve. If things are shut down, then just like it was in 2019 or 2020, everyone was furloughed. In fact, most of the city was furloughed during that period of time.
And we just had a meeting where at the time, we discussed, we can decide this isn't set in stone where the money is. If a disaster happens, we can move money around.
Right, yeah. But, you do want something to pay utilities and keep things running until we can open up again.
Yeah, well, the sales tax revenue keeps rolling in. I mean, even during the shutdown, there was sales tax revenue. So, it's not, I don't think you plan for the worst case. You make sure that you are able to get by. There's plenty of money to pay the bills that have to be paid. But really, the utilities, I mean, the kind of the short-term obligations are utilities. The note on the 2 shuttles that should have been paid for with cash if they were going to be purchased, but that's beside the point. And payroll is flexible. If you don't have the work to do, then the payroll isn't going to be there.
Okay, and then my final question is, Scott had provided us with a worksheet when we were discussing the budget in beginning of December, and it showed the income for the parks so far through that year as being about 117,000, and it estimated by the end of the year it would be about 120,000. But the actual in the profit and loss is 97,000, and I just wondered why that discrepancy occurred.
Okay. And, yeah, I mean, just looking at the math actually on the numbers, these 2 transactions answer your question. And thank you for calling me this morning to ask, because I went and I looked at what happened in November and December. Very quickly to explain what she's talking about is when I prepared the budget, we were only 10 months into the year, and so I knew we would have 2 more months worth of income and expenses. And so what I did is I took what we had over the previous 10 months, divided it by 10 to get our monthly amount, and plugged it into those next 2 months, both income and expenses. Well, we all know it's more than guessing, but it's just one step above guessing, because different expenses hit different times of the year, et cetera. So at any rate, even though it was estimates, as Sue just said, we ended up being off about $23,000 from what I guessed versus what reality was. So I did look at November and December's transactions to see if there were any out of the ordinary expenses, and we had 2. There was a $5,000 payment to Stacy Stonework for work at Magnetic Spring, and the big one was the road repairs. We spent $31,825.18 on road repairs at Lake Leatherwood City Park, and both of those transactions together, almost $37,000. So in reality, if it wasn't for those 2 large transactions, we would be ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. But we knew we had to do the road repairs. In fact, all of the road repairs we needed would have taken $125,000. We took we decided to do the biggest and worst potholes to get those repaired. I mean, you could just about lose a Volkswagen in some of those that we had. And then some of the work that we needed, there's some other potholes that need to be done, and then the road really needs to be sealed. Well, at that time of the year, it was too cold to put that sealer on. They said it needed to be 60 to 65 degrees and above. And so all we did was the real big potholes we repaired. So I would have liked to have had more work done on the road, but that explains why my estimate of where we would be at the end of the year ended up a little higher than what we were. But we accomplished a repair that was very, very long overdue, and that's what we received out of it.
I think the key there is that it was a projection. It was
Yeah,
guessing
yeah,
the
no,
last
yeah.
2 months.
And we knew that.
Yeah.
He was less than 4% off
Yeah.
in the total number.
Yeah,
which
and
is-
I also think I have a right to ask about the discrepancy, so, and Scott has come up with an answer for that.
Yep. Okay. Anything else?
No.
Ruth?
No.
Good? Okay. So we have a motion and a second on the table. Motion is to approve the 2021 financials. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Okay. So it passes 4-0. Abstentions are not counted as votes. Okay. That concludes the business for the special meeting.
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Now, we get to start the workshop for tonight. I hope that everyone at least had an opportunity to glance through the various things that we sent out. I'd actually like to go at it opposite from what it is on the agenda, simply because it'll be a little bit easier. First of all, Freedom of Information Act. When I first planned on having this agenda for the workshop because of all the new commissioners, it was before the mayor's office had confirmed the upcoming seminar next week on Freedom of Information Act. So we'll just kind of go over some high points. I would expect everyone to try to be able to make it to it. Kim has confirmed that it will be recorded, so if you are unable to attend for any reason, it will be available on the city's YouTube channel to review. I think the biggest thing to know is that everybody on this commission is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. That means that any communications that take place, either formal meetings or informal meetings between commissioners, is considered public record and is subject to FOIA requests. I would strongly recommend that everybody set up a separate account, separate email account. And with Google, it's easy to just simply go in and give yourself a separate email account for Parks business, because it will make life a great deal simpler when you get hit with a FOIA request where you have to go dig back through 6 months' worth of emails. If it's intermingled in your personal emails, it makes it quite difficult. The upcoming workshop is going to be 2 hours long. It will be put on by representatives from the State Attorney General's office, and so I would imagine the information that you will get out of that will be far more accurate than anything I will be able to address. My understanding is that the agenda is going to be FOIA, open meeting laws, definition of open meetings, and ex parte communication. And I know that's something that a number of people have questioned. I actually found a very good definition of ex parte communication as it relates to us in particular, but governmental business. And it is, ex parte communication is any oral or written communication made without proper notice to all parties and not on the public record from an interested person outside the agency, in this case the commission, to a member of the agency or an employee involved in the decision-making process. So fundamentally, what that says is any one-on-one conversation between a commissioner and somebody outside the commission who is trying to influence a decision is considered ex parte communication and is improper. That doesn't mean that individuals cannot communicate with the commission. It's just that the appropriate way to do it is for that communication to involve all commissioners. And that communication will be part of the public record and is FOIable. So I'm guessing that they will probably go into that in a little bit more detail. Our standing committee meetings, in the past, the way we have approached those is that we just simply, for the Finance Committee, for the most part, we communicated with Scott individually by email. All of those emails are FOIable because they are considered meetings. When the few times that we did, both Scott Barton and I meet with Scott, we notified Kim. Kim announced it as a public meeting, and it was recorded, voice recorded. The Grievance Committee, because it is typically more sensitive in the past, Ruth and Carmen, who were the Grievance Committee, would communicate with whoever was making the grievance individually, and then they would come and present whatever it was their findings were to the commission. That's something that I intend to ask in the workshop that's coming up next week, to understand what degree that is public record and what degree it's treated like
where's the line between
employment
Yeah.
Information. Now, one thing I will say, that the Grievance Committee is intended to only deal with grievances from outside of Parks and Recreation Commission. We used it once because of very particular circumstances this year with an employee grievance. But there is a different grievance process for employees, and it follows the same process that the city does. Okay, that is basically it. These two pamphlets are ones that I found last year when I joined the commission. They both have good information in them. The thicker one is actually a PowerPoint, so it contains less information because it's like 2 sentences per page typically. This one actually has some really good information because it has court cases and the results of those court cases. It's a little bit dry reading, but it's worth going through because it gives you particular examples of things that make it a little easier to understand. I'm going to stop for just a minute because I forgot. Mark Ingram, who is sitting out there, will be approved as the 7th, hopefully approved. He will be voted on by the city council next Monday in their meeting. I have asked him to join us since he will be seated by the time we have our regular meeting on the 15th, I think it is. So Mark, if you want, you can come up and take a seat up here. Since this is not a voting meeting,
Right.
there's no reason why he can't join us, and it will benefit him. Okay, so unless anyone wants to discuss anything regarding FOIA, we can move on. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
I just would say that we definitely need to get a clarified opinion on text messages. It was explained to me when I became interim director that if it's our own phone and we're not being reimbursed by the city, then that's not considered city communications. But that doesn't mean you don't have to be careful. You can't use that as a shield for this. But I definitely would like some clarification on that. Hopefully they'll discuss it in the meeting.
When Justin and all that was going on, remember he had phone problems that weren't working, he had a phone that wasn't working. My communication with him was often by text, all of ours was, because you'd have to text him first, and then he wouldn't call you back till you knew it was you calling, because he didn't know the number, crazy stuff. But when it was all said and done, all my texts with him got FOIA'd. And when I called and asked about it, they said texts are FOIable, no matter whether they pay for the phone, whose phone it is or not. It was the biggest pain I've ever been through my whole life. It took me many weeks to get all that done. But I found out that it's true. Your texts are FOIable no matter what.
Well, then that's the type of thing we need to create a policy on that the commission, I think, needs to set. Because, for instance, for my own phone, I like things neat and clean. And I mean, I don't keep text, nor will I. So if they're going to say any text that comes through my cell phone needs to be kept for 3 years, well then, guess what? I unfortunately would not be able to make my phone available for communications. And what are we going to have the city buy us all cell phones?
I know, it was,
So we do need to clarify that.
we do. That's a good thing to ask at the thing.
So what is FOIable under Freedom of Information Act and the open meeting laws is when commissioners are discussing business. And that's something that's key in a town this size, is that it is next to impossible to not run into another commissioner. And as long as you haven't set a meeting for the purpose of discussing business that is in front of or could be in front of the commission, then that is not considered a public meeting under the rules of open meeting laws and Freedom of Information Act. My understanding is that an individual commissioner's communications with the director, as is in our relationship as chair and executive director, is not considered an open meeting because you are not a member of the commission.
Right.
But that we can clarify.
So that must be why that applies to me, but perhaps not to you, speaking with another commission.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but again, I think it's worth clarifying next week when we have them here to be able to ask the question. Okay. Then the next thing I'd like to go over is the bylaws. This was kind of one of the priorities that we had set for last year, to get bylaws in place since they had never existed for the Parks Commission in its 40 years. And I want to thank Sandy Martin for all of her effort in helping me with this, because I don't know that it would have gotten done if we hadn't had help from her. Now, I will say that we will be, probably in the next couple of months, bringing in amendments to this, starting with the first paragraph under Article 2, which references the enabling legislation in the state code, which we have been informed is incorrect by the Municipal League. And the mayor asked Scott to draft the new ordinance, which follows the language of the state code, which has been through review. I don't know when it is that he's planning to take it to the city council, but it should be adopted. And as soon as it's adopted, then we'll have to make revisions so that it's making the right reference. And just so everyone understands, in the state code, there are 3 different commission types. So there are 3 subparagraphs under Parks and Recreation commissions. The one referenced here is for a commission type that is stood up only to serve for to manage a single project. And so typically it's something that's used for a city that has a Parks and Recreation department rather than a commission. The commission is created if they have a large capital project to manage the capital project. And then the other 2 types are Parks and Recreation Commission that is tasked with managing parks facilities, and then a Parks and Recreation Commission that's tasked with managing only Parks and Recreation programs. So we've redrafted it correctly, making the correct references to the state statutes, and we will go in and make updates to the bylaws once we have that.
Kevin?
Yes.
On the bylaws, if one or more commissioners wants to suggest an amendment, how is that done?
Well, I would imagine once we get the ordinance corrected, then we will probably put this on the agenda for a workshop to discuss any updates to it.
Thank you.
So if you have any suggestions for updates, you're welcome to communicate them, and we'll put them on a list for consideration. This kind of feeds into what we'll get to with the policy manual, because the policy manual, quite a bit of the bylaws supersedes parts of the policy manual. The policy manual is really kind of a curious document because it's clearly evolved over time, but it's not terribly clear since none of the pages are dated, or very few of the pages are dated. Few of them have page numbers, which are actually still applicable currently. So this is the next thing on the agenda. We've already started a process for drafting a new policy manual that will not conflict with the bylaws and will not conflict with the operations and procedures manual that Scott has been working on for the parks operations, for the actual staff operations and staff roles. But a few of the things that I just want to kind of touch on while we are going through this. There's one, in the copy that I sent you, there is one paragraph under Article 6, paragraph B, qualifications, that is in red. The reason it's in red is that this is addressing the at-large commissioners that had not been approved by the city council at the time we adopted the bylaws. We knew that it was on their agenda and it was coming up, so we didn't wait to vote for it. It was just highlighted and with the note, adoption pending ordinance adoption. So it is, and it will be changed in future copies to black, and that note will be taken off of it. Talk a little bit about officers and elections, because that's going to be the first thing on the agenda in 2 weeks for the regular meeting. Typically, it would be the January meeting, but we put it off knowing that we would have 3 new commissioners by February. And there was no point in holding elections, only to have supplemental elections afterwards. So the officers of the commission are the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary. One of the things we did when we wrote these bylaws is made it very clear that they are 1-year terms and that they are voted on every year as though the positions are vacant, because technically they are. We also wrote into it a term limit, if you will, where none of the officer positions can be held by any single person for more than 2 consecutive years. And so the intent is to make sure that that there's a distribution of the roles in the commission and everybody is contributing to the business of managing the parks, and 2, so that you don't have anybody sitting in the chair in perpetuity. I think to the benefit of the commission to make sure that it rotates around and that people, everybody understands the role, and that it's not a small role. The role, just like the secretary role, is not a small role. It requires time and a personal commitment to be able to do it, but it's required because of all the initiatives that we've been trying to get through and things that we've been cleaning up over the last year. I've probably managed close to 15 hours a week for the last year working on parks business, which was not really how I had intended to spend my retirement, but it's part of the commitment we make, and we've been able to make real progress on it. So when that comes up in the next meeting, if you would just make sure that you're familiar with nomination process, the voting process. Kind of the keynotes is that during the nomination process, it's as though the role of chair doesn't exist. Anybody can nominate anybody. It doesn't require a second. It's not technically a motion. Anyone can be nominated. If anyone is nominated and they want to withdraw their name from consideration, they can do so, with the exception of, and it's noted in here, that you may not withdraw in favor of another member. So it's okay to say, I don't think I can do the job, or I don't think I have time to do the job. There are other jobs that you'll be able to do. But you can't do it because Mark doesn't want to take it because he wants Edward to do it instead. So it's an attempt to make it as equitable as possible. The other advantage to waiting until February was that we knew we would most likely have all 7 seats filled, which makes it much easier. There are, between the officer roles and the 2 standing committees, there are 7 positions to be filled, and there's 7 commissioners, so everybody will be able to take something on. Goes through the duties of the chair, the duties of the vice chair, and the duties of the secretary. I will say that in the past, a number of the duties of the secretary have been delegated primarily to either the director or the director's staff. And that's something that can be addressed on an individual basis as we go through it. Sue graciously took on getting the agendas and the minutes taken care of so that Scott doesn't have to. It's one thing that was taken off his plate. Things like scheduling FOIA training is unnecessary because the mayor's office has taken care of that. Setting meeting dates and times, that's established by the city calendar, so we don't need to do that. Duties of the vice chair is basically to just assume the duties of the chair in the absence of the chair. There are no other duties to that. And the duties of the chair is to preside over meetings, decide upon points of order, procedure during the meeting, and the chair is the primary contact with the executive director, first in chain of command. And we'll talk about chain of command a little bit in the grievance process as well. It goes through meetings, conduct of meetings, order of business. It's all fairly straightforward. Robert's Rules of Order will be used, and there is, in the electronic copy of this, there is a URL link on the last page to Robert's Rules of Order cheat sheet that is quite helpful. I will say that there is a note in here that says that, well, there's two things. One is about disqualifications. So conflict of interest is something that needs to be addressed if there is a conflict of interest with any commissioner and a matter that is before the commission. They need to state that conflict, make it clear, and withdraw from any discussion or the vote of that item. The expectation is that everyone comes to the meetings prepared and is able to vote on an item, either yes or no. An abstention is not counted as a vote, but it has the same effect as a no vote. So as a personal feeling, I'm going to vote either yes or no on something because it's appropriate to go on the record, whether you agree with something or you don't agree with it. There are no hard and fast rules about that. And so you can abstain. The abstentions will not be called for. They're not counted. Either way, it's as though there was one fewer person at the meeting as far as the vote is concerned. Talks about ad hoc committees and standing committees. The only ad hoc committee that we've had has been the Trails Committee, which, like every time it has come up in the past, has drawn people the first meeting or two, and then it dwindles away to nothing, and there's no participation. So that we will not fill a Trails Committee position. The standing committees, as I said, are the Finance Committee, which will be 2 commissioners, and the Grievance Committee, which will be 2 commissioners. And we've talked about those roles. The purpose of the Finance Committee is to work with Scott to help him in ensuring that when financials come to the table, that everyone can have a reasonable satisfaction that they are correct and can vote on them. And that's basically it for the bylaws, but I would urge everyone to read through them in detail if you haven't already. The manual, as I said, is kind of a hodgepodge of things that go back to when the commission was originally created in 1980. I think the last or the most recent date that I've seen in any of this is 2006. So it's been some time since any updates have been made. You can read through here. The bylaws cover responsibilities of the commission, duties of the commissioners, and the various different commission roles, officer roles, duties and responsibilities of the commission in here will be updated to reflect that and make sure that they comply with the current state statutes and what will be the new city ordinance once it's adopted, which is, I don't think Scott basically just took the language straight from the state statutes,
Yes.
correct? Okay. So there shouldn't be any question about that. The duties listed for the commission are pretty much the same as they're going to be in here. I don't see a lot of difference in that. There will be some language that will address in there. Duties and responsibilities of the executive director. We need to go in and clarify certain things. And streamline what we can. I think if you go through this, kind of all of the reports and planning documents and everything that are required in here, there currently isn't time in the day for the director to do. There needs to be more clarity behind that. And we've made the commitment to Scott that we're going to help get to a point where he can have enough staff that he's able to focus on the things that he needs to focus on, which is, larger strategic operational issues and less day-to-day, kind of in the weeds sort of things that he's been in for the last year. As I said, the ordinance that's in here is going to be addressed. The second part of the ordinance, which is the parks themselves, Chapter 12.8, that defines all of the properties that have been handed over to the parks over time. We had asked Chris Fisher probably 6 months ago to go through and give us an assessment of the various spring gardens, and with a primary focus on looking at risks from trees that have been allowed to grow places that they should never have been allowed to grow. So there are a number of places where walls are being undermined by trees that are just entirely too large and too close to the walls. Part of that has been a bit enlightening in that there are 3 springs that are listed that he has not been able to find or find any records of. None of the springs apparently have a survey of any sort. They have old beats and bounds that date back to the late 1800s that rely entirely upon rocks and trees for significant points in them. So I have a meeting scheduled with the mayor this week to start a conversation about how we address this part of it, try to get an agreement from him on actually surveying all the properties, because it's entirely unclear where the boundaries are on most of these reservations. And then address separate issues, one of which being Basin Park and how the work that's going to be done on Basin Park is going to be paid for, and how we address that kind of holistically, because it's not, we've kind of discussed in principle that it needs to be shared across, the city parks and probably the CAPC because of the way the facility is used. So that'll be kind of the initiation of this. I'm going to ask him to put together kind of a group of the department heads to lead an effort making recommendations on how this part of the code needs to be rewritten and addressed in the future. This is really, the rewrite of this is really going to be more a city council thing. It's not something that we're going to vote on. It's just going to, it'll affect the way we address the parks going forward. In here, documents toward the back, and this is why it's a little bit different. You can't, because there are no page numbers on it, it's a little hard to reference people, but there's things in here about relationships of the commission, with fellow commissioners, with the city council, interagency, that sort of thing. I think it's all relevant. It all needs to be rewritten so that it's more appropriate and a little more direct on what those are. There's a lot of redundant things between our commission's culture, commissioner's code. Those are all things that should be looked at collectively and agreed upon. Trying to find the grievance procedure that is about 2/3 of the way back is basically a chain of command. So it basically, this is the grievance procedure for employee grievances as opposed to the Grievance Committee that we have. And it gives chain of command up through staff, supervisor, director, chair of the commission, vice chair of the commission after the chair of the commission, administrative assistant would be the mayor's assistant, Kim, mayor, and then city council. So if it's an employee of the parks, and now that we're back to a flat organization, if their grievance is with a coworker, they take it to Scott. If their grievance is with Scott, they bring it to me. If the grievance is with me from an employee, it goes to Scott. So it's not, like I said, the one case where we used the Grievance Committee to address an employee issue is not going to be the norm going forward. It's just there were extenuating circumstances with that made it prudent to have more than one person addressing the grievance. And I think the rest of this really is just old items that were never deleted from the book in the first place. So if anyone has any comments or questions on that. Nope, all good? Okay. I think we will, as we get to a point where we are, have at least an outline draft of a policy manual. It will come also to a workshop. Everyone will get a copy of it in advance, and we will discuss it in a workshop and move forward from there.
Who will be producing that draft?
I'm sorry?
Who will be producing that draft?
Can you?
Sorry, who will be producing that draft?
Well, at this point, it was Sandy Martin had offered to assist with that as well. And the plan was that I would work with her. If there's a new chair in 2 weeks, then the new chair can work with Sandy on it. Unless somebody wants to step up and volunteer to do it. But we can address that after the officer elections. So I will say that because we all kind of learned about the challenges with getting any changes at the bank. Once we get past the election of officers and appoint the committee members, we will need to change the signature cards at the bank. In order to change the signature cards at the bank, the dance that we had to go through last year is it has to show up in meeting minutes. The meeting minutes have to be approved. There has to be a letter requesting the change. Mm-hmm. It has to go before the committee, before the commission, and be voted on. So what we're going to try to do is streamline that a bit. I've asked Scott to draft a letter with blanks for chair, vice chair, and the 2 finance committee members who should be the signatories on the checks. Once we conduct the business of the meeting and we have chair, vice chair, and those committee members, then we will be able to handwrite in the blanks. We will be able to vote on that letter in the meeting, in the same meeting, which will save us at least 30 days over the
Yeah.
process that we went through last year, so then the following meeting, and we may well do it as a special meeting before the next workshop, vote on the minutes and be able to take that to the bank and get everything taken care of in a much shorter time frame. It's a process that is going to need to go into both his operations manual as well as policy manual, because one of the things we found when we went to change the signature cards is that the bank requires that you tell them which names to take off as well as which names to put back on.
Right.
And what we found was that there were names that were on signature cards that hadn't been on the commission for years.
Yeah.
So, again, it's one of those things we need to just establish a process behind and get it done, and get it done as quickly as possible, because we were in limbo, and I think you were the only one that had signature authority
Right,
for
that's
about
weird.
3 months. So,
Yeah, it was way too long. It needs to be a faster process.
okay. Does anyone have any comments?
Just, I would comment on what you just were talking about as far as the bank, because it did take so long last time. Those minutes, does anyone know offhand, does Arkansas law allow for consent minutes where we don't have to have a meeting as long as they're signed by each of you?
I don't
I
remember.
think it's,
It's a question you could ask the bank.
Yeah, that's what they,
okay,
I mean, if they are signed by everyone,
right.
I don't see that as any different than being voted on.
Yeah, I don't know that the bank would know. I'll check with Kim, she might know.
Okay.
yeah.
It doesn't appear to be in our, I'll check with Kim and see if there's,
I mean, it's still going to require time to review the minutes.
oh, sure.
So, if we can get it done so that we can address it on the 2-week cycle to the workshop, that's plenty fast enough. It's, we can vote on them, we can get the minutes done, and get them out for everybody to review, be able to vote on them in a special meeting.
Okay,
The letter, because we're going to be filling in the blank, will be voted on in the meeting of the
meeting, yeah.
elections. So
Okay.
it'll be done and ready to go.
well, in that event, then, we could have that letter done in advance.
That's what I mean.
I know you just said that, but I mean, have it done in advance, and I don't think there's anything that precludes us from voting on the minutes of that meeting at that meeting, at least the minutes for that topic, right?
Well, no, because the minutes are going to have to be typed up and they're going to have to be reviewed, so.
I thought you had indicated we'd
If we
have
can
them.
get it down to 2 weeks, that's a home run.
Okay,
That's-
very well.
We don't.
Then 2 weeks
try
is
to get it
fine.
done.
It's better than the 3 or
Yeah.
4 months it took last time, so, okay.
I will say that one thing that I did neglect to mention with regard to the elections is the way the elections occur, the vote on the chair is the first item of business at the next meeting. Whoever is elected chair is chair from that point on and runs the meeting from that point. So just so everyone's prepared. Have your notes ready. Okay. If no one has anything else, we'll call that a meeting. I do want to just acknowledge Edward and Pat and Mark, and thank you guys for stepping up. We have not had a full commission since December of last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Been a long
So-
time.
Kevin, when I came on the board, I introduced myself to the rest of the commission, and I'm hoping the new commissioners can do that at the next meeting.
Okay.
And I would suggest one of the best things to get up to speed on what's going on right now is I'm required to do a year-end report, which was done in late December, and that includes the condition and trend of all of our assets, the projected work for the next year, and one or two other kind of silly things like what FOIA request we had that year. If you don't have that yet, If I just make sure, I think I have everyone's contact information. Somebody
Everyone's
sent-
contact information was on,
was just sent out
yeah.
a day or two ago.
Yeah, I'd love to get that. That'd be
Okay.
Yeah.
my big thing is I'd like to just get up to speed a little bit as to
Well,
what's going on, you know?
I would suggest, same thing we did with Jonathan. You are welcome to schedule some time with Scott,
I would love to do that.
and he can kind of spend an hour or so walking you through
Yeah.
things and
I-
just kind of hit the high points.
I took them through, well, we just went to Leatherwood Park, but I, showed them some of the key projects and needs and whatnot, and more than happy to do that. Just, we have to do it with just one of you at a time, well, or call it a meeting, properly notice a meeting, but I'm happy to do that, and, but that year-end report will be good for you to look at, and then let me know if you have any questions on it. It includes a lot of the work that we have projected, and we're also going to start sending out a kind of a monthly list of work that we have projected, so you'll know what we have coming up. We've had recently, people will say, well, we've never heard that in the meeting. Was it ever discussed? And yes, it was, but unless they were sitting in the meeting, they don't know. So the point is, I'll send that out once a month so you see what's coming up, and that way if there's a question, you can ask about it and not wait till people are asking you questions about why was this project done or why was that project done. You'll know in advance. In fact, I'll bring that along with the monthly financial statement, just the P&L statement. That way we can ask questions and deal with them while they're fresh. So those are all new things that we'll be doing as far as reporting for you.
One.
Yeah, and just on Commissioner's contact information, the Secretary is supposed to keep that updated. And in the past, it's always been sent out to all the commissioners. I didn't do that because I didn't want to have to redo it next week.
Right.
But I do have that on my to-do list.
So I'll get you Mark's information.
Yeah, I think I actually have his email and phone number.
And we also need to make note, I don't know who in City Hall actually updates the city website, but there's some corrections that need to occur on that as well. So we will, we'll address all of those, and I'll get everything to you tomorrow. Well, maybe the next day. We'll have snow days coming up. We'll have plenty
Yes,
of
we will
time
have
to-
snow days.
to email.
Yeah, school's already been called off and everything.
Okay, if that's it, we will call it an evening, and
That's
we'll
it.
Ron go home.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We just coordinate the month out, and matter of fact, I dropped my
You got your
laptop
official
home.
certificate.